Everyone says the millionaire is infertile and sickly, but one night is all it takes. She ends up pregnant. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Alcot Stories, where every story touches your heart and stirs your imagination. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive into today's tale, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I love hearing from you all. All right, settle in, get cozy. Let's dive right into today's story. The night was heavy with rain, each droplet lashing against the glass walls of the penthouse as if the storm outside mirrored the turmoil within. In the heart of the towering cityscape, Asher Lockwood stood alone, a titan brought to his knees by whispers he couldn't silence. Once he had been the embodiment of invincibility. The mere mention of his name, Asher Lockwood, commanded rooms, opened markets, and shaped futures. He was a self-made billionaire, the architect of Lockwood Technologies, the man who took ideas and spun them into gold. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was nothing more than a broken man hiding in the shadows of his own empire. The media's cruel symphony played on every channel. Billionaire Lockwood, infertile. Inside the Lockwood marriage collapse. Ilara Lockwood breaks. Silence. It wasn't me. Each headline was another dagger, expertly driven into the softest parts of his pride. The cause: a miscarriage. A tragedy that should have brought sympathy, understanding. Instead, it bred suspicion and ridicule. Ilara, his elegant, poised wife, had walked out mere days after the funeral of their unborn child, her silence screaming louder than any denial. In the sterile, cavernous space of the penthouse, Asher replayed the moment she left. Her face pale, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in an apology she couldn't bear to speak. The click of the door behind her still echoed in his mind. He had stood there, frozen, watching the only person he thought he could trust turn away without a second glance. He sank into the leather chair behind his desk, one hand raking through his dark hair, disheveled and damp from pacing. The storm outside blurred the city lights into messy, bleeding colors, an abstract painting of a life unraveling. His phone buzzed. Another alert, another blow. He ignored it. What more could they say that hadn't already been dissected, mocked, and broadcast for the world's entertainment? A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Infertile. As if his entire worth as a man, a husband, a leader, could be reduced to a medical diagnosis whispered behind closed doors. A rumor, that's all it took. Not proof, not truth. Just a whisper, and the wolves had come running, baying for blood. He opened a bottle of whiskey, pouring a generous glass. The amber liquid caught the light, a brief flash of warmth in the otherwise cold room. He took a long sip, letting the burn sear away the numbness creeping into his chest. He hadn't even been tested. He hadn't needed to be. He and Ilara had always said they'd wait, build the company, build their empire. Children could come later. Except later had arrived without warning, without preparation, and with it the crushing failure that now defined him. A sharp knock at the door snapped him from his reverie. Asher frowned. It was past midnight. Too late for visitors, even for him. He ignored it. Another knock, more insistent. Grimacing, he rose, crossing the expanse of the room. The security panel showed no one. Weird. He pressed the intercom. "Who is it?" Silence. He hesitated, instincts flaring. But something, curiosity, defiance, made him unlock the door and swing it open. No one. Just the howling wind, cold and biting, rushing past him. And then he saw it. A single envelope, weighted down by a stone, lying on the doormat. No address, no stamp. Just his name, scrawled in a hurried hand. He bent down, picking it up. The paper was damp at the edges, but still intact. Inside, a single slip of paper. 6 words, written in stark black ink. The truth isn't what they say. Asher's heart stumbled in his chest. He read it again, and again. Who had sent it? What truth? His mind raced, tangled threads of suspicion weaving into something darker, something desperate. For the first time in weeks, a spark flickered inside him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to straighten his spine, to steady the tremble in his hands. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as broken as they all thought. Maybe there was still a war left to fight. He stared out into the raging night, the letter crumpled tight in his fist. The scandal had broken him, but it had also awakened something far more dangerous, something that refused to die. Asher Lockwood would not go down without knowing the truth, and whoever had started this fire would soon learn. Beneath the polished billionaire exterior lived a man forged in steel, and he was just getting started. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Asher walked the pristine halls of St. Clarion's Medical Center, his shoes making soft sounds against the polished floors. It was a place he had donated millions to build, a wing bearing the Lockwood name. Once it had been a symbol of hope, of legacy. Tonight it was a hunting ground for answers. The note burned in his pocket, as if its 6 words had carved themselves into his skin. The truth isn't what they say. He didn't know who had sent it, but somehow every instinct screamed the same message. Come here. Start here. He passed faceless nurses and stern-faced doctors, none daring to stop him. Power clung to him like a second skin, even in his disheveled state. Creased shirt, tea hanging loose, days-old stubble on his jaw. His heart was a tight knot, beating harder the closer he got to the NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. The place buzzed with a quiet kind of urgency, machines blinking and beeping in rhythm with tiny heartbeats. Behind glass walls, impossibly small babies fought their first battles. He watched them for a moment, awed by their fragility, by the fierce tenderness of the nurses tending to them. And then he saw her. Dr. Sienna Rhodes. She moved through the room like a whisper, hardly disturbing the air around her. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, a few rebellious strands framing a face too young to carry such heaviness in her eyes. She wasn't tall, but there was something unshakable in her posture, like a tree standing stubborn against the storm. In her arms she cradled a bundle so small it barely filled the crook of her elbow. Baby Luna, the chart outside the incubator read. No parents listed, no emergency contact. Just a wait, a date of birth, and a long list of medical battles already fought and still to come. Asher watched Sienna lower Luna back into her incubator with heartbreaking gentleness, her gloved hands adjusting the tubes and wires with practiced grace. He didn't know why, but something about the sight rooted him to the spot. Something more than pity. Something deeper. He cleared his throat. It sounded too loud in the hush of the NICU. Sienna turned sharply, instinctively shielding the incubator with her body. Her eyes found him, sharp, assessing, guarded. Yes. Her voice was soft, but edged with steel. For a moment he forgot what he meant to say. She wasn't beautiful in the traditional, polished way Ilara had been. There was no pretense, no glossy perfection. Just raw presence, realness, A rare, dangerous thing. "I'm Asher Lockwood," he said finally, stuffing his hands into his pockets to keep them from trembling. "I know." Her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "You're hard to miss these days." He flinched, the words hitting their mark, but he recovered quickly. "I'm looking into a matter involving the hospital, donations, patient welfare, due diligence. It was a lie, but not a blatant one. He needed an excuse to be here. Somehow he knew she wouldn't appreciate the real reason." Sienna arched an eyebrow. "We're very careful with our patients, Mr. Lockwood, especially here." Her glance flickered back to baby Luna, and something almost maternal crossed her face. "She doesn't have anyone, does she?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Sienna stiffened. "No," she said carefully. "Her mother couldn't stay." It was the way she said it, not the words themselves, that caught him. There was sorrow there, and guilt, and something else he couldn't name. He stepped closer to the glass, peering down at the tiny figure inside. Luna was so small he feared she might break under the weight of his gaze, but she slept, oblivious, a fighter wrapped in tubes and prayers. "She looks—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish the thought. Fragile, brave, familiar. Sienna's arms folded across her chest, a shield he hadn't realized she needed until now. "You're not here for her." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "No," he admitted, "but maybe I should be." Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the NICU didn't exist. There was only the storm between them, silent but fierce. He shifted, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. There was something about her, something that set every nerve he had on edge. Not fear, not attraction, something deeper. "I heard rumors," he said, voice low. "About me, about infertility." The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He expected a polite nod or awkward silence. Instead, he saw it. The flinch. Small. Fast. But unmistakable. Her hands tightened into fists. Her shoulders tensed. Her jaw clenched. It was gone in a second, smoothed over with clinical detachment. But Asher Lockwood didn't build an empire by missing details. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "You know something." Sienna's mouth pressed into a flat line. "I know rumors are toxic," she said stiffly, "and that grief makes people cruel." It was a good answer, practiced, too practiced. But he didn't push. Not yet. He had learned long ago that some walls couldn't be battered down. They had to be disassembled, brick by brick. Instead, he glanced once more at baby Luna, then at Sienna, who stood like a soldier at her post, protecting the smallest soul in the room. "Thank you for taking care of her," he said quietly. For the first time, something in Sienna's face softened, just a fraction. "You're welcome," she murmured. But her eyes followed him all the way to the door, watchful, wary, as if she knew he wasn't leaving for good. Asher walked back into the night, the hospital's automatic doors hissing closed behind him. The rain had stopped. The air smelled sharp and new, like the world had been washed clean. But inside him, storms still brewed. Sienna Rhodes knew more than she was saying. Baby Luna wasn't just another patient. And if Asher Lockwood had learned anything in his rise to the top, it was this. The deeper the secret, the darker the shadows guarding it. He wasn't leaving Saint. Clarion's behind. Not until he tore every secret into the light. And it all started with the girl in the shadows. The next morning, Asher Lockwood sat in his car, staring at the gleaming facade of Saint. Clarions through the windshield. The engine purred beneath him, impatient, but he made no move to get out. A simple piece of paper, tucked into the inner pocket of his suit, weighed heavier than all his fortunes combined. The hospital's records wouldn't just fall into his hands, not legally, but Asher hadn't built his empire playing by every rule. And today was no different. He checked his watch. Dr. Sienna Rhodes would be on her rounds, the NICU bustling with nurses, techs, and visiting specialists. Perfect cover. Perfect chaos. Sliding on his sunglasses, he stepped into the building, a man on a mission cloaked in calm. Inside the NICU, the lights buzzed low, a soft lullaby of technology. He nodded politely at the nurse behind the desk, flashing his donor badge like a shield. She smiled, nervous, honored, and returned to her paperwork. Asher's steps were purposeful, but quiet as he approached baby Luna's station. She slept, tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic labor. A fighter. Just like him. He crouched down, pretending to adjust the side of the incubator. His heart hammered. His hands, normally steady as a surgeon's, trembled. He took a deep breath, slipping a small, sterile cotton swab from his pocket. One quick swipe inside the corner of Luna's mouth. Gentle, precise. She didn't even stir. Tucking the swab into a sealed bag, he straightened, casting a furtive glance around. No alarms. No curious eyes. Good. A soft voice behind him nearly sent his heart through his ribcage. You're very interested in her. He turned to find Sienna standing there, clipboard in hand, eyebrows raised. She's special, Asher managed, forcing a smile. Sienna's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion sharpening her features. You don't strike me as the sentimental type, Mr. Lockwood. He gave a nonchalant shrug. Maybe I've changed. Her gaze lingered, assessing, but she said nothing more. Instead, she moved to check Luna's vitals, every movement efficient. Tender. Asher watched her for a moment longer, then nodded stiffly and left, the swab burning a hole in his pocket. 2 hours later, he sat in a small, nondescript office on the city's west side. The private lab was discreet, used to celebrities, politicians, men like him who needed answers no one else could be trusted to find. Across the desk, a bespectacled technician handled the bag with practiced care. You'll have results within 24 hours, he assured Asher. Faster, Asher said curtly, sliding a thick envelope across the table. The man's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, understanding perfectly. Asher left without another word, the sterile, fluorescent world of the lab falling away behind him. He needed air. He needed clarity. He didn't know what he needed. All he knew was that the seed of doubt had taken root, and it was growing into something wild and unstoppable. The following evening, Asher's phone buzzed. The number was unlisted. He answered immediately. It's done, the technician said. You should see this yourself. Asher didn't wait. He was in his car within minutes, tearing through the city streets like a man chased by demons. When he reached the lab, the same technician ushered him inside, sliding a manila envelope across the table with trembling hands. Asher ripped it open, his heart thundering so loudly he could barely hear the rustle of the paper. There, in stark, clinical print, was the truth. 99.9% probability of biological relationship. Father. He stared at the words, uncomprehending at first. Father. Not uncle, not distant relative. Father. Baby Luna wasn't just another abandoned soul. She wasn't just a cause for pity. She was his daughter, his blood, his legacy. A strangled sound tore from his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He dropped heavily into the nearest chair, head in his hands. Memories flashed through his mind. Nights spent working, months spent traveling, years spent focused solely on building, conquering, surviving. No time for distractions, no time for life beyond spreadsheets and strategy. He had never met Luna's mother, had he? He tried to summon faces, names, encounters lost to the whirlwind of galas and business dinners, but none fit. None explained their tiny, perfect life now tethered to his own. And then the questions came, rapid fire and brutal. Who was her mother? Why had she hidden Luna from him? Who else knew? Who wanted him to find out now? The room seemed to close in on him, the walls squeezing tighter with every breath. Asher rose, shoving the papers back into the envelope with shaking hands. He needed to think. He needed to plan. And more than anything, he needed answers. But first, he needed to see her, not just from behind glass, not as a curiosity, as her father. The thought sent a bolt of fear through him, sharper than anything he had felt, facing hostile takeovers and ruthless competitors. This wasn't a boardroom battle. This was life. Real, messy, terrifying life, and he was already losing ground. When he returned to the NICU, Sienna was there again, waiting, watching. She saw the change in him instantly. She straightened, the clipboard forgotten in her hands. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. Asher met her gaze, his own stripped bare of defenses. "She's mine," he said simply. For a heartbeat, the world stood still between them. No alarms, no heart monitors, no whispered prayers, just truth. Heavy, irrevocable. Sienna's face paled, the blood draining from her cheeks. She gripped the side of Luna's incubator for support, knuckles white. "I dot," she faltered, words catching in her throat. But Asher stepped closer, voice low and fierce. "Who is her mother, Doctor?" "Rhodes," his hands clenched at his sides. "And why the hell was my daughter hidden from me?" Sienna's eyes filled with something Asher couldn't immediately place, fear, regret, sorrow. But she said nothing. Not yet. And in the chasm of her silence, Asher knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. The fight for answers had only just begun, and he would tear down heaven and earth to get to the truth. The air between them thickened, a silent war waging in the sterile glow of the NICU. Machines beeped softly, a cruel reminder that life, fragile, innocent, beat on, while secrets festered. Sienna gripped the edge of baby Luna's crib, her gaze locked with Asher's, her throat working as she fought for composure. There was a story she could tell him. So many pieces woven together with fear, sacrifice, and broken trust. But not here. Not with so many ears, so many eyes. Without a word, she turned away, moving toward the small staff lounge tucked behind the NICU. Asher followed, his strides purposeful, his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild thing. Inside the lounge, Sienna closed the door and leaned against it, head bowed. For a moment, she said nothing, just breathed in and out, gathering shattered courage. Finally, she looked up, her voice a hoarse whisper. "You deserve to know. All of it." Asher folded his arms, a pillar of cold fury and wounded hope. "Start talking." Sienna sank into a chair, twisting her fingers together. Her voice trembled as she began. "It wasn't just the miscarriage," she said. "Elara leaving you. It wasn't because she stopped loving you." Asher's brow furrowed, anger and confusion warring inside him. "Then why? Why abandon everything we built?" Sienna exhaled shakily, the memories dragging her under. "Because she was paid to disappear." The words hit him like a slap. He blinked once, twice, struggling to process. Paid? By who? Someone powerful. Someone close to you. Sienna's gaze darted away. I don't know exactly who, but there were threats against her, against you, against your company. Asher swore under his breath, pacing the small room. Pieces of the past clicked into place like jagged puzzle fragments. The sudden shift in Ilara's demeanor, the cold distance, the abrupt divorce, all of it, manufactured, manipulated. He turned back to Sienna, voice low and lethal. How do you know this? Her throat bobbed. My sister, Natalie. She overheard things, saw documents. Ilara confided in her once when things got bad. Natalie. The name felt like a ghost brushing past him, the mother of his child, a woman he could barely remember, but whose life had collided with his so catastrophically. And Natalie kept it all a secret, Asher said bitterly. She kept my daughter from me. Sienna's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She thought she was protecting you. She didn't trust anyone anymore. Not after what they did to Ilara. Asher sank into a chair opposite her, his hands steepled under his chin. The weight of betrayal, of missed years, of what could have been, pressed down like a physical thing. And through it all, Luna's tiny, valiant heartbeat pulsed in the distance, a beacon in the storm. For a long moment, silence reigned between them, heavy with grief and things left unsaid. Then Asher leaned forward, his eyes burning. I need proof. I need names, documents, something I can use. Sienna hesitated, biting her lower lip. There might be something in Luna's file. Natalie hid things there. Medical notes, maybe more. Asher stood abruptly, renewed purpose stiffening his spine. Then I'll find it. Before Sienna could protest, he was already striding from the lounge, back into the NICU. She followed, heart pounding, torn between fear and inevitability. Asher moved with deadly precision, bypassing nurses and aides, until he reached the secured medical records station. His fingers danced across the tablet screen, searching, slicing through layers of encryption like a surgeon through flesh. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a strategist, a predator. And now, a father desperate to reclaim what was stolen. Sienna reached him just as he accessed Luna's file. Wait, she hissed, grabbing his arm. You can't. This is illegal. If they catch you. I don't care, he growled, shaking her off. She's my daughter. Her eyes widened, panic overtaking her carefully composed facade. No, you don't understand. There are things in there, things that could destroy you. Asher froze, fingers hovering over the screen. He looked at Sienna. Really looked, and for the first time he saw the raw terror etched across her face. What the hell are you talking about? He demanded. Before she could answer, a nurse's voice crackled over the intercom. Doctor? Rhodes to NICU main desk, please. Dr. Rhodes. Sienna flinched. Time was running out. She grabbed Asher's wrist, pulling him away from the terminal. Come with me, she whispered fiercely. I'll show you. But not here. Not now. Asher hesitated, torn between rage and reason. But in the end, he let her drag him away, the mystery deepening with every step. Behind them, the screen blinked innocently, hiding its damning secrets for just a little while longer. Out in the parking garage, the cold night air wrapped around them like a shroud. Sienna leaned against a pillar, breathing hard, her whole body trembling. Asher stood before her, a dark silhouette framed by the harsh, fluorescent lights. You're going to tell me everything, he said, voice like iron. No more lies. No more half-truths. Sienna nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I will. I promise. And as she opened her mouth to speak, the distant screech of tires echoed through the garage. A shadow peeling away from the darkness. Watching. Waiting. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The cold night wrapped around them, sharp and biting. But Asher barely noticed. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything but the sight of Sienna, trembling, broken, cornered between concrete pillars and the weight of the past. You need to tell me, Asher said, voice low, urgent. The screech of tires moments ago had peeled away into silence, but the threat lingered, thick, invisible, real. Sienna hugged herself as if shielding from more than just the chill. Her lips parted. Words trembled on the brink. And then, finally, they fell. I'm not her mother, she whispered. I'm Luna's aunt. The revelation sliced the air between them. Asher froze. For a moment, the world tilted, made no sense. You're what? My sister, Natalie, was her mother, Sienna continued, voice breaking. She wiped a tear hastily, ashamed of it. You met her once, a long time ago. Asher staggered back a step, blinking as if struck. He grasped for memories, ghosts from another life, flickers of faces and voices lost to the corridors of time. A gala. Charity lights strung like stars across velvet skies. Laughter. A woman's eyes, bright, mischievous. A night blurred by champagne and sorrow. At the fundraiser, he rasped, the pieces locking into place. The night of Light's gala. Years ago. Sienna nodded, biting her lower lip so hard it bled. Yes, you were drunk, grieving your father. She didn't know who you were at first, and by the time she did, the memory coiled tighter around his heart. A stranger's kindness in a sea of fake smiles, a hand reaching for his in a moment of despair. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. And she never told me, he said bitterly. She never reached out. Sienna's face crumpled. She wanted to. God, Asher, she wanted to, but... She stopped, choking on the words. But what? He demanded. You're out of reasons to hide anything from me. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, hot and unstoppable. Because they threatened her, she cried out. They said if she came to you, if she made any claims, they'd destroy her, destroy you, take Luna away before she was even born. The world spun. The ground felt hollow beneath his feet. Asher braced himself against the pillar, jaw tight, chest heaving. Who were they? How far did their reach extend? He shook his head, anger flaring hot and fast. She should have come to me anyway. I would have protected her. You couldn't even protect yourself, Sienna sobbed. They poisoned everything around you, made you believe you were broken, sterile, weak. How could Natalie believe you would survive a scandal this big when the whole world already called you a failure? Her words hit their mark. Asher stumbled, the accusations, not against him, but against the unseen puppeteers, searing deeper than any wound. And then, Sienna whispered, it was too late. He looked at her, lost. What happened to her? His voice broke. Tell me, please. Sienna closed her eyes, gathering the shards of the story she had carried like a dagger in her heart for so long. Natalie was alone. She went into labor early. There were complications. She couldn't get to the hospital in time. By the time they found her, her breath hitched, pain radiating from every word. She'd already given birth. She'd already named her, Luna. But her body, she was too weak. She didn't survive. Silence devoured them. A life lost, a life born, both tethered to him in ways he had never known. Asher slid down against the pillar, burying his face in his hands. Grief roared through him, a storm without mercy. He hadn't just lost years with his daughter. He had lost the chance to know the woman who bore her. Sienna knelt before him, her hands hovering helplessly. "I took Luna," she said softly. "I swore I would protect her from everything that took Natalie away." "And you thought hiding her from me was the answer," he said, voice raw, lifting his head. "I thought," she faltered, shaking her head. "I thought if they knew you were involved, they'd come for her too. And without Natalie, without anyone else, I didn't know who I could trust." Asher leaned his head back against the cold stone, closing his eyes. Trust, a currency too rare, too fragile, especially in his world. "Why now?" he asked, voice quieter, roughened with exhaustion. "Why not tell me sooner?" Sienna's hands twisted in her lap. "I was scared, and then you showed up, and Luna. She responded to you. Even when she was unconscious, it was like she knew." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "My own daughter, recognizing me when I didn't even know she existed." Sienna reached out, tentatively, placing a hand over his clenched fist. "You have every right to hate me," she said. "But you have every right to love her, too." Asher's eyes snapped open. Not hate. Number hate wasn't what burned in his chest. It was something older, something deeper, a relentless need to protect, to reclaim, to build a family that no amount of lies could steal from him again. He rose slowly, towering over Sienna, determination etching itself into every line of his face. "I'm not losing her," he said, voice like iron. "Not to them. Not to anyone." Sienna stared up at him, hope flickering in her battered heart. "And you're going to help me," Asher added, offering his hand. "Because you loved Natalie. Because you love Luna. And because now, your family too." Sienna hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his, her fingers trembling, but her grip steady. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Above them, somewhere in the shadows of the parking garage, a figure watched, recording, listening, plotting. The battle was only beginning. But for the first time, Asher wasn't fighting alone. He had Luna, he had Sienna, he had the truth. And no one, no lie, was going to take that away again. The darkened streets were no solace, the air thick with the weight of what had just been uncovered. Asher's mind raced, replaying every conversation, every calculated move, searching for the threads that tied all the lies together. Sienna stood beside him in the car, eyes fixed forward, her face pale, haunted. "You really think Damien's behind all of this?" she asked, her voice a tight whisper. Asher's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Everything points to him," he muttered, more to himself than to Sienna. Damien had the most to gain, and he knew how to play the game. "He's been orchestrating my downfall for months." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers drumming lightly on her leg. "How? I mean, how could he make people believe you were sterile?" Asher's gaze flicked to her, the fury in his eyes palpable. "Damien's good at one thing, finding weak spots. He planted those rumors with Ilara's miscarriage, used it to strip me of everything, my reputation, my company. And all the while, he was biding his time, waiting to make his move." Sienna leaned back, processing his words. "So he created a story, a false narrative about your infertility," she murmured. "And now he's using it to take control of everything you've built." Asher didn't answer right away, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like a vice. "I never saw it coming. Damien was always my business partner. We were close. Sienna turned to face him, her voice low but firm. He's not just your partner anymore, Asher. He's a predator. And if he's behind all of this, you're not just fighting for your reputation. You're fighting for your life. And for Luna's. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. And now I know why he didn't care about the rumors. He was using them to get close, to break me down. And now... His voice trailed off. Sienna glanced over at him, worry flickering in her eyes. What's next? The answer was simple, but its consequences were dire. Now we expose him. Back at the office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Asher paced his private office, the walls lined with sharp angles of glass and steel, his empire now threatened by the very hands he trusted. He couldn't trust anyone anymore, not even his closest allies. He took out his phone, dialing the number of his top investigator. The ring tone echoed in the silence, each second stretching longer than the last. When the call was finally answered, Asher's voice was sharp, filled with cold purpose. I need everything you can find on Damien Cole, and I need it now. The investigator's voice crackled through the speaker. Understood. I'll get back to you in the morning. Asher's eyes darkened. Number, I need it tonight. Full dossier. And get me the names of his contacts. I want to know who's been involved in this from the start. Got it. I'll move fast. Asher hung up, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Every move Damien made felt like a carefully crafted piece in a high-stakes game, one that Asher had to win, or he would lose everything. He turned to Sienna, who had been sitting in the corner, watching him quietly. I'm going after him tonight, he said. Damien won't know what hit him. Sienna nodded, standing and walking toward him. But you can't do this alone. Not now. Not when he's already shown how far he's willing to go. He met her gaze. I know. That's why I'm putting everything on the line. I'll expose him. Take him down. Sienna's voice dropped to a whisper, a tremor in her words. And what if he goes after Luna? What if he comes after her next? Asher's heart clenched at the thought. That's why you're staying with her. At the hospital, tonight. I'm not letting anything happen to her. Hours later, as the clock ticked toward midnight, Asher's investigation team had finally compiled the information he had been waiting for. The results were chilling. Damien had been orchestrating a careful and calculated series of events to weaken Asher's grip on the tech empire. The infertility rumors had been only one part of it. But the real surprise. Damien had been in bed with some of Asher's competitors, financial backers who were more than willing to pull the rug out from under him in exchange for control. The betrayal ran deeper than Asher had imagined. Damien had been playing both sides, posing as a loyal friend while positioning himself to take over Asher's company. It was all so clear now, the pieces falling into place like a puzzle that had once been too complicated to solve. But just as Asher was about to make his move, an urgent call cut through the tension. Sienna, Asher said, his voice sharp as a blade, I need you to stay on the phone with me. Don't go anywhere. Sienna's voice on the other end was tight with fear. I'm at the hospital, Asher. I'm staying with Luna. Asher's gut tightened. Good. Stay with her. I'm coming to you. The line went dead just as Asher heard the soft sound of footsteps echoing from the corridor outside his office. He turned, instantly sensing danger. Before he could react, the office door burst open. Two men, dressed in black, stormed inside. Their eyes gleamed with malice, weapons drawn. Asher's pulse quickened, but his body was already reacting, his instincts sharp as he dove toward his desk drawer, pulling out the gun he kept hidden for emergencies. The men didn't hesitate. They moved fast, blocking his escape, forcing him to fight back. Sienna. Luna. He couldn't afford to let them get to her. With the gun gripped tightly in his hand, Asher fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the blast deafening in the confined space. "Get down!" he shouted, diving for cover behind the office furniture. The two men hesitated, but they weren't backing down. Damien's men had come for him, for everything. They were hunting him, and they were not going to stop until they had what they wanted. Meanwhile, Sienna stood alone in the empty hospital lobby, a cold sweat running down her spine as she glanced at the entrance. Something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She knew that danger was closing in. The phone buzzed in her pocket. Asher's name appeared on the screen, but before she could answer, a shadow loomed over her. She turned. A man stood in the doorway, his face obscured by a mask, his eyes gleaming with a cold, calculating purpose. Sienna froze. The man stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "We're here for the girl." The hospital's sterile white walls pressed in on Asher as he sprinted down the corridor, his breath ragged, pulse thundering in his chest. The sound of his footsteps echoed loudly, drowning out everything else. Sienna had barely had time to grab Luna's chart before they were forced to flee. The thought of the men who had broken into his office, Damien's men, sent a cold chill through him. They were hunting them. He wasn't sure if they were still after Luna, or if they would strike again at any moment. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let them take his daughter. Sienna, walking a few steps behind, turned to glance at him, her face pale with fear, but determined. "I'm scared, Asher." Her voice was soft, but the tremor beneath it was unmistakable. Asher slowed his pace slightly, looking back at her. The fear in her eyes mirrored his own, but he couldn't let it show. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. "I know, but we're getting her out of here. No one's going to hurt her." Sienna swallowed hard, nodding. "But the custody hearing, it's not going to be easy." Asher's jaw tightened as he pushed open the door to the elevator, gesturing for her to step inside. He didn't care about the hearing anymore. "I don't care about anything but keeping her safe, and I will fight for her. I have to." The elevator doors slid shut, and the hum of machinery filled the silence between them. The court date loomed over Asher like a storm cloud, heavy with threat. A fight for custody. One that would determine not just Luna's future, but his own. He had no idea how it would unfold, but he knew that his connection to her, the bond they shared, was stronger than any legal document or threat from Damien. But Damien wasn't going to let this go easily. Asher had discovered the depths of the lies and manipulation, and now it was time to expose them all. Damien's interference had already begun. His men were pulling every string they could find, leaving no stone unturned. The stakes were high, and every move mattered. Asher sat at the table in his lawyer's office, the weight of the battle pressing heavily on his shoulders. His legal team sat across from him, papers and legal documents strewn out on the table, like the pieces of a broken puzzle. He barely heard them, his mind far away, focused on one thing. Luna. Sienna sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her fingers brushed against his skin, grounding him, keeping him tethered to the present. "We have to prove that you're her father, Asher. The lawyer, a seasoned woman with a sharp gaze, said, "Damien's team will fight us at every turn, so we need solid proof, strong DNA evidence, unassailable witnesses. But most importantly, we need Luna." Asher nodded, his heart tightening. He'd already taken the DNA test. The results were undeniable. Luna was his daughter. He just had to make sure they saw it, too. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice low but resolute. Sienna squeezed his hand, offering a quiet comfort as the lawyer continued speaking, detailing the tactics they would need to employ to counter Damien's sabotage. But even as they discussed the logistics of their case, Asher couldn't stop thinking about Luna. Later that night, after hours of strategizing, Asher and Sienna found themselves alone, standing in the dimly lit NICU, the soft beeping of medical machines surrounding them. Luna was still under the care of the hospital staff, her tiny body fighting every moment for survival. Asher stood by her incubator, watching her sleep, her little face peaceful in a way that made his heart ache. He reached out, brushing his fingers gently across the glass. He wasn't allowed to touch her yet, not until she was stronger. But every instinct in him screamed for contact. He turned to Sienna, his voice cracking with emotion. "I can't do this without her. I've lost so much already. I can't lose her, too." Sienna placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice quiet but steady. "You won't. You're already proving it. You're fighting for her. And we'll fight together." Asher took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Luna's fragile form. "You've seen it, Sienna. She knows me. Even when she was unconscious, she knew. She held my finger, her tiny hand curling around mine." His voice faltered as he continued. "That's what I keep coming back to. She knows me, and I won't let anyone take that away from us." Sienna's gaze softened. She had seen it too, the subtle shift in Luna's demeanor when Asher held her hand, the way the tiny infant seemed to sense his presence. He was her father. And no one was going to take that from him. The following morning was the day of the custody hearing. Asher stood in front of the courthouse, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. The building loomed ahead like a fortress, the heavy stone walls a reminder of how hard this fight was going to be. Beside him, Sienna stood tall, her face set with determination. She had been a pillar of strength for him throughout this whole ordeal, and now, more than ever, he needed her by his side. "You're going to win this," she said softly, her hand once again resting on his. "You have to." He turned to her, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his face. "I don't know if I can do it alone, but with you, I can." Her eyes softened, and she gave him a reassuring smile. "We'll do this together." Inside the courtroom, Asher felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. Damien's team was relentless, throwing accusation after accusation, attempting to paint Asher as an unfit father. The rumors about his infertility were still in the air, floating like poison, each word designed to weaken his case. But Asher remained calm, his resolve unwavering. He had the truth on his side. When the time came for him to take the stand, he stood tall, his heart racing, but his voice steady. The lawyer asked the questions, guiding him through the process, and slowly, carefully, they built their case, step by step. But it was the moment when they presented the DNA test results that everything changed. Asher's lawyer slid the document across the table, and the courtroom fell silent as the judge read the results aloud. Luna was his daughter. There was no question. no doubt. But just as the victory seemed within reach, Damien's attorney made a final desperate move. He pushed forward the argument that Asher had not been an active part of Luna's life, that he had only just discovered she was his daughter. The suggestion was clear. He hadn't been there when she needed him most. Sienna watched, her heart in her throat, as Asher's resolve was tested once again. And then, a small miracle. The courtroom had been silent for a long moment when they suddenly heard the faintest sound, a tiny, unmistakable cry. Asher's heart stopped. He turned to Sienna, his eyes wide. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "It's Luna." The nurse entered, cradling Luna in her arms. Luna's tiny hand reached out as if sensing her father's presence. Asher stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached toward her. And then, the moment, Luna's small fingers curled around his, gripping his finger with a strength that belied her size. The room held its breath. The judge looked up, eyes softening as he watched the bond unfold before him. Asher's breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to break. The tears welled up in his eyes as he held her hand, his voice breaking as he whispered, "She knows me, Sienna." She knows. Sienna's eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer to him, her heart swelling at the sight of father and daughter. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed, the purest expression of love and connection. The judge, moved by the moment, looked at Asher. "You've proven it, Mr. Lockwood. You are Luna's father, and no one can deny that bond." Asher stood in the sterile NICU, the soft hum of machines around him, the steady beeping of the monitors, and the faint scent of antiseptic filling the air. Luna lay there, wrapped in soft blankets, her tiny form fragile, but growing stronger by the day. The peace of this moment was something Asher had fought for, and it was all he cared about now. But even in this sanctuary of hope, there was a lurking shadow. Damien. Damien Cole wasn't going to let this custody battle go quietly. Asher knew that much. It had been weeks since their legal victory. But Damien had never stopped scheming. He was dangerous, and his obsession with Luna had only deepened. Asher had received reports that Damien's men had been watching the hospital, gathering information, preparing for the next move. And now, standing in the NICU with Sienna at his side, Asher had the sinking feeling that Damien was about to make his most reckless move yet. Sienna was beside him, her eyes fixed on Luna as she checked the monitors, making sure everything was in order. Asher couldn't help but watch her. The way her focus and care for Luna made everything feel like it was worth it. The peace of this moment felt so fragile, yet so precious. "You think he'll try something today?" Asher asked, his voice quiet but laced with tension. Sienna didn't look up from the monitor as she answered. "I wouldn't put it past him." There was a calmness in her tone, but a hint of worry lingered. "We need to stay vigilant." As if on cue, a sound, sharp, sudden, and out of the place, echoed from the hallway outside the NICU. A door slammed shut, followed by hurried footsteps. Asher's instincts immediately kicked in. His heart raced, and his muscles tensed. "I'll check it out," he said, moving toward the door. Sienna stood up, her gaze sharp. She knew what he was thinking. "Don't go alone," she warned, but Asher had already moved into the hallway. The hospital corridor was empty, the only sound his hurried footsteps. Asher's heart pounded as he scanned the hallway, eyes darting from one side to the other. Something wasn't right. He turned a corner only to freeze when he saw a familiar figure. Damien. But there was no mistaking the man's purpose this time. Damien wasn't here to negotiate. His eyes burned with a manic intensity. And in his arms, held tightly but dangerously, was Luna. Asher's blood ran cold. "No!" Asher shouted, lunging forward. But before he could reach Damien, the man took off, moving swiftly down the hallway with a speed Asher had never expected from him. "Damn it!" Asher cursed under his breath. He bolted after Damien, his legs pumping with urgency. Back in the NICU, Sienna had just finished double-checking Luna's chart when she heard the commotion down the hall. Her instincts flared. Something was wrong. Asher's voice echoed down the hallway, a desperate shout that sent a jolt of panic through her. She didn't hesitate. Luna. Damien. They were after Luna. Sienna's heart raced as she sprinted towards the hallway. She knew the hospital well, knew the twists and turns that would lead her to the emergency exit. She could hear the pounding footsteps of Asher in pursuit of Damien. But they wouldn't get there in time. Sienna reached the stairwell door, gripping the handle with determination. The sound of frantic footsteps was growing louder. She pushed the door open, her eyes narrowing, as she saw Damien and Luna just a few paces ahead. Without thinking, Sienna moved faster, her body already shifting into an instinctual rhythm, the same rhythm that had kept her alive during her time in the military. The combat training she had kept hidden from Asher, from everyone. Her hand shot out, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher. She lifted it high, running full speed toward Damien. Damien turned just as Sienna swung the extinguisher with all her might. The metal struck his side with a dull thud, knocking him off balance. He staggered, but didn't fall. He glared at Sienna, fury blazing in his eyes. "You!" he spat, his grip on Luna tightening. Sienna didn't hesitate. She dropped the fire extinguisher to the ground and launched herself at him, using every ounce of her training. She dodged his wild swing, then spun behind him, using his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. Damien grunted in pain, but he was no rookie. He recovered quickly, spinning to face her with an angry snarl. "You're making a huge mistake," he hissed. "This is bigger than you, Rhodes." Sienna's eyes locked on his with a steely determination. She wasn't going to let him take Luna. Not now. Not ever. Asher rounded the corner just in time to see Damien collide with the wall, his eyes wide as he saw Sienna take control of the situation. "Sienna!" he shouted, rushing toward them. "Get out of the way." But Sienna didn't need him to tell her what to do. She was already in the zone, her military training taking over. She stepped forward, blocking Damien's path, her stance wide and strong. "You want her?" Sienna said, her voice cold. "You're going to have to go through me first." Damien sneered, his eyes flashing with rage. He moved forward, trying to shove past her, but Sienna was quicker. With a swift move, she grabbed his arm, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him toward the wall with brutal efficiency. Asher reached them just as Damien crumpled to the floor, clutching his wrist in pain. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his face a mix of shock and admiration for Sienna. "You!" Asher started, his voice thick with disbelief. "You're a—" "I told you I wasn't who you thought I was," Sienna interrupted, her face calm, though her eyes were burning with adrenaline. "I did what I had to do to survive, and now I'm doing what I have to do to protect Luna." Asher stepped forward, crouching next to Damien, his fists clenched. "You're not getting away with this, Cole. This ends now." Damien groaning as he tried to push himself up, shot Asher a venomous glare. "You think this is over?" he spat. "I'll come for her again. I'll—" Before he could finish, security arrived, rushing into the hallway with a team of officers. Asher and Sienna exchanged a look. It was over. The officers quickly cuffed Damien, hauling him away, his protests echoing through the corridor. Sienna let out a slow breath as the adrenaline began to fade. She looked at Asher, her voice softening as she said, "It's over. He won't get near her again." Asher, still shaking from the confrontation, nodded. His gaze softened as he looked down at Luna, who was now safely back in the NICU, her tiny hand curled around his finger. He had almost lost her. But Sienna, she had saved them. And in that moment, he knew that he would never be able to repay her for what she had done. The sterile scent of the NICU was still fresh in the air as Asher stood there, his eyes locked on the tiny form of Luna, who was once again sleeping soundly in her incubator. Her fragile presence was a constant reminder of everything he had fought for, everything that was still at risk. Beside him, Sienna stood quietly, her arms crossed, a slight tension in her posture. Asher knew she was thinking about the events of the past few hours, but there was something else in her eyes, a heaviness, as if there was more she needed to tell him. They had survived the confrontation with Damien, but Asher could feel that the calm had only settled temporarily. The storm wasn't over. And there was one more thing, a secret Sienna had been holding back. Sienna's eyes flickered to him, a look of uncertainty in her expression. She stepped closer to the incubator, but it wasn't the baby she was looking at. It was Asher. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him. "Asher," she began, her voice steady, but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "There's something you need to know. Something about Natalie." Asher froze, the mention of her name sending a ripple through his chest. He hadn't thought of Natalie in years, not until Sienna had dropped the bombshell about her being Luna's mother. But the more he pieced together, the more questions flooded his mind. "Why didn't she tell me?" Asher asked, his voice low, almost like a whisper. His heart was pounding, though his gaze remained fixed on Luna, as though he could find some comfort there. "Why didn't Natalie ever come to me? Why keep this from me?" Sienna's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, her hand resting gently on the side of the incubator as she avoided his gaze. "Because she was protecting you, Asher," she replied quietly. "Protecting your reputation and her own heart." Asher's mind spun. Protecting his reputation. But from what? Why would Natalie, a woman he barely knew, choose to hide their child from him? He had to know the truth. Sienna took a slow breath, turning to face him fully now, her eyes soft but full of pain. She had always been the strong one, the woman who stood guard for Luna, the woman who had kept everything together. But now, there was a crack in that armor. "Natalie and you," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "weren't just strangers at that gala. You met long before that. In fact, you met years ago. She never told you because you didn't remember." Asher's stomach twisted. "I don't understand. We met before, but I don't remember." Sienna nodded, her eyes dark with the weight of a secret that had been buried for so long. "It was before the gala. A few months before, actually. You were both at a charity event, a fundraiser for a cause you supported, one of many that you were always involved in. You two had a connection, something real. But you were at a point in your life where you weren't looking for anything serious. You were focused on your career, on the next big project. And Natalie, her voice cracked. Natalie was just trying to make it on her own. She didn't expect anything from you. But she never forgot you. Asher's mind raced. His memories of that time were scattered, fleeting moments that felt distant, as if they belonged to another life entirely. But now that Sienna was talking, pieces of that night began to come back to him. He had met a woman whose eyes had captured him for just a moment. He had felt something, a spark, but he had left before anything could come of it. That was all. He had never even thought about her again. But she had thought about him. Sienna continued, her voice quieter now. She never thought you would remember her. So when she found out she was pregnant, she didn't want to burden you with the consequences of that night. She knew how much you had at stake. She knew that at the time, the kind of scandal it would bring would ruin your reputation. It would ruin everything you had built. She kept Luna a secret, because she thought it was the only way to protect you. Asher closed his eyes, the pain of realization settling in his chest like a heavy stone. His heart ached for Natalie, for the woman he had barely known, but who had carried the weight of their child, of their history, on her own. And he had never known. He had never known the sacrifice she had made for him. You mean, Asher's voice faltered, she didn't want me to know. She didn't want me to ruin my life for her. And for Luna. Sienna's eyes met his, her expression filled with sorrow. Yes, she was trying to protect you, Asher. She thought she was saving you from a life you didn't want. She thought it was the only way. Asher's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Anger surged in him, not toward Natalie, but at the world that had forced her to make that choice. At himself, for being so oblivious, so wrapped up in his own ambitions that he had let her slip through his fingers. And at the lies that had been spread, at the rumors that had almost torn his life apart. But then, a deep ache settled in his chest, something more profound than anger. Guilt. Natalie had been trying to protect him from the chaos of it all, but in doing so, she had hidden Luna from him. She had given up everything, even her own happiness, to shield him from something he didn't even know he had been part of. And then came the heartbreak of it all. Sienna's next words were the hardest to hear. Natalie didn't just keep Luna from you because of your reputation, Asher, she whispered. She kept her from you because she didn't want you to carry the guilt of what she thought was a mistake. She never wanted you to think she was using you. She thought it would destroy you. And when she died, she took that secret to her grave. Asher staggered back, his hand gripping the side of the incubator as the truth hit him like a freight train. Natalie, the woman he had briefly known, the woman who had cared for him in a way he could never have imagined, had died alone, carrying that secret, never giving him the chance to know his daughter. He was left with nothing but the echoes of what might have been. Sienna's voice broke the silence. She never wanted you to suffer, Asher. She loved you enough to let you go. And when she died, she asked me to make sure Luna was taken care of. I promised her I would keep Luna safe, and I will. Asher's eyes were raw, filled with the grief he hadn't known he was carrying. I didn't even know she existed, he whispered, the pain evident in his voice. I didn't know. Luna existed. Sienna stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his arm. But you do now, and that's all that matters. You can't change the past, Asher, but you can fight for her now. For Luna. She's your daughter, and she needs you. The words hung heavy in the air, but Asher knew they were true. The past couldn't be undone, but the future was still in his hands, and Luna needed him. The air in the NICU was heavy with emotion. The days following the revelation about Natalie had left Asher in a state of stunned silence. He had been grappling with the weight of everything he'd learned about Luna, about Natalie, and about Sienna, who had stood by his side through the darkest moments of his life. He felt raw, like his entire world had been dismantled and scattered in front of him, leaving only shards of what he had once believed to be true. But there was something else there now, something he hadn't expected. In the midst of the chaos, in the ruins of the life he once knew, a fragile connection was starting to grow between him and Sienna. It wasn't the kind of connection that was easily defined. It was subtle, something that crept up on him when he least expected it, like the soft way she spoke to Luna, or the way she would touch his arm lightly when he was too lost in his thoughts. Asher had always prided himself on being able to control every aspect of his life, but with Sienna, nothing seemed within his control anymore. He wasn't sure when it had started, but there was no denying it now. He was falling for her. Days blurred into nights as they took turns sitting by Luna's incubator, watching over the fragile baby who had already stolen their hearts. The NICU became their shared world, one where time seemed to stand still, where nothing else mattered except the small, delicate life they were both committed to protecting. Luna, tiny and fragile, had become the center of their universe. Sienna was unwavering in her care for the baby. Her professional demeanor never faltered, but Asher could see the tenderness she carried beneath it. She was protective, yes, but there was something else, a quiet strength in the way she handled Luna, as if every touch, every action, was a promise that she would never let anything harm the
little girl. Asher found himself constantly amazed by her. Sienna was so much more than the mysterious, guarded woman he had first met. She was a mother figure, both to Luna and to him. She had this way of looking at the world, of seeing things in a way that made him rethink his own perceptions. She was fierce, intelligent, and resilient, but there was a softness to her that made his heart ache. One night the hospital was quieter than usual. The hum of medical equipment was the only sound, and the soft glow of fluorescent lights bathed the room in an almost ethereal light. It was late, much later than either of them had expected to be there, but neither of them wanted to leave. They sat beside Luna's incubator, the only company they had in the stillness. Sienna was talking about the little things, the way Luna's fingers had tightened around hers that morning, or how she had let out a tiny, contented sigh in her sleep. Asher listened, captivated by the way her eyes softened when she spoke about Luna. There was a gentleness to her, a nurturing quality that Asher hadn't expected from someone so strong. "You know," Sienna said quietly, glancing at Asher, "I never imagined being a mother. I always thought I would be a career woman, working in a lab or teaching. But then everything changed with Luna. She's so small but so powerful, you know? It's like she's teaching me how to love in ways I never thought possible." Asher's gaze softened. He had never seen her like this, vulnerable, open, sharing something so personal. For a moment he didn't know what to say. His heart was beating faster than usual, his emotions stirred by the rawness of her words. "You're an incredible woman, Sienna," Asher said, his voice low, the weight of sincerity in every word. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. There was a long silence, a quiet understanding passing between them. Asher's eyes searched hers, and for the first time he allowed himself to truly look at her, not as the woman who had helped him navigate through the lies and the pain, but as someone who had become a part of his heart in a way he hadn't anticipated. Sienna looked down, her cheeks flushed slightly. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. Asher's gaze dropped to her hand resting on the edge of Luna's incubator. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was electric, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. There was only the two of them, standing at the precipice of something neither of them had expected. Sienna turned toward him, her breath shallow. Asher could see the change in her eyes. There was a softness there, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. She wasn't just the strong, protective doctor anymore. She was a woman who had been through her own battles, and now she was standing there with him, sharing this fragile moment. Their faces were inches apart now, their breaths mingling in the dim light. Asher's heart pounded in his chest as he found himself leaning closer, drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. It was slow, a deliberate movement, but neither of them pulled away. And then, as if the universe had orchestrated the moment, their lips met in a kiss. Tentative at first, hesitant, as if both of them were afraid of what it meant. But as the kiss deepened, there was no fear. There was only the warmth of her lips against his, the feeling of finally letting go, of being free from the walls they had both built around themselves. It was a slow burn, this kiss, a culmination of everything they had been through together, of all the secrets they had uncovered, of the pain they had shared, and the bond they had formed over Luna's fragile life. Just as Asher's hand moved to cup her face, pulling her closer, the door to the NICU swung open with a sharp click. The sound cut through the moment like a knife, and they broke apart instantly, both of them looking toward the door in shock. Ilara stood there, her presence as striking as ever. Her eyes swept over the room, and for a moment it felt like the air had gone still. Asher's heart skipped a beat. What are you doing here?" Asher asked, his voice betraying a mix of surprise and confusion. Ilara didn't answer immediately. She stood frozen for a moment, her gaze flickering between Asher and Sienna. There was something in her eyes, something cold, but also calculated. The tension in the room thickened. Sienna quickly stepped back, her face flushed, as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. Asher didn't know how to process what had just happened. The kiss, the way he felt, everything seemed to freeze in that 1 second. Ilara took a step forward, her voice icy and controlled. "I came to see my daughter." Asher's stomach tightened. There was no mistaking it. Ilara had returned and everything had just shifted. But in that moment, as Ilara's presence filled the room, Asher couldn't help but feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just fear or confusion. There was a part of him that knew, no matter what happened next, he was no longer the man he used to be. And as Sienna stepped back, giving him space to face his ex-wife, Asher realized just how much things had changed. The tension in the NICU was palpable. The quiet buzz of the incubators and the soft hum of medical equipment seemed distant now, as though they were all drowned out by the weight of Ilara's presence. Asher's heart was still racing from the kiss he had shared with Sienna moments earlier. That fragile, stolen moment felt like a lifetime ago now, as if the world had come crashing down around him in the instant Ilara had walked into the room. Sienna stood stiffly at the side, her face unreadable. She had taken a step back, giving Asher space, but her eyes never left Ilara, as if trying to gauge the situation, trying to anticipate what might come next. But it was Asher who felt the gravity of it all. He wasn't sure what was more surprising, the fact that Ilara had returned after all this time, or the cold, calculating look in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Asher could feel the heat of Ilara's gaze, her sharp eyes cutting into him like daggers. The years they had spent together seemed to weigh heavily between
them now. And yet, There was a strange distance. The woman standing in front of him wasn't the one he had once shared everything with. She wasn't the person he had once trusted implicitly. No, this woman, this stranger, had changed. She was no longer the wife he had loved, but a woman with an agenda. Finally, Elara broke the silence. Her voice was icy, controlled, but there was something dangerous about it. "I came to see my daughter," Elara said, her words clipped. Her gaze flickered briefly to Sienna, then back to Asher. "I'm sure you've heard the news. Luna is mine. I'm her real mother." Asher's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened, his mind racing to process what he had just heard. "What?" he muttered, almost as if the word couldn't form properly in his mouth. "What do you mean, your real mother?" Elara took a step closer, her presence suffocating. "I know you've been playing the father, Asher, but Luna is mine. I gave birth to her, and I deserve to raise her." There it was, the claim that shattered everything Asher had believed. His heart thudded in his chest, his thoughts swirling. Elara had been gone for so long, and now she was asserting this, as if her absence had been nothing. Asher tried to steady himself, but the shock of it all hit him like a punch to the gut. "No," Asher said, shaking his head, his voice rising with disbelief. "This doesn't make sense. How can you say that? You've been gone for years, and now you just show up and claim Luna as your own." But Elara wasn't listening. She was relentless now, her voice colder than it had ever been. "I've hired a lawyer, and we are going to court. I will have full custody of my daughter. The truth is, I was forced to leave you all those years ago. But Luna's mine, Asher. You don't get to take her from me." Asher felt the walls around him closing in. He was stunned, unable to comprehend the enormity of what Elara was saying. He couldn't understand how she could be so heartless, how she could come back after all this time and make such a claim. And yet, there was something else. A gut feeling that told him there was more to this than just a sudden reunion. Sienna, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward, her face hardening. "You're lying," she said, her voice steady but full of conviction. "Luna's mother isn't you, Elara. It's not possible." Elara scoffed, raising an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's possible. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Sienna's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't backing down. "You didn't give birth to Luna, Elara. You're not her mother." For the first time, Elara's composure faltered. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or fear. Something that didn't align with the cold, calculating persona she had presented. Asher could feel his pulse quicken, sensing that there was something she wasn't saying, something hidden beneath her words. "You don't know what you're talking about," Elara spat. "You have no idea what I've been through, what we've been through. I'll take you to court, and I'll win. Luna will be mine, and I'll be her mother." But as Elara made her bold proclamation, something in Asher clicked. It wasn't just the words themselves that unsettled him. It was the way she was saying them, the way she was pushing this narrative so forcefully. It didn't feel right. There was something more beneath the surface, something he wasn't seeing, something he had yet to uncover. The room fell silent for a moment. Asher's mind raced. Was it possible? Was Elara really telling the truth? His thoughts flashed back to the times he had questioned everything: his marriage, his fertility, his ability to be a father. But no, he couldn't believe it. He refused to believe that the woman who had once been his wife could come back after all this time and claim Luna as her own, without any real proof. Then, as if on cue, Sienna spoke again, her voice hard with the truth. "You're lying, Ilara. You didn't give birth to Luna. You're not her mother, and I can prove it." Ilara's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly recovered, a smug smile creeping onto her face. "Oh, really? And how do you plan on doing that? By telling more lies?" Sienna met her gaze without flinching, her voice lowering with a calm intensity. "Because you're not just lying about being Luna's mother. You're lying about everything. You're being paid to lie." Ilara froze. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly masked it. Asher's heart skipped a beat. "What?" he whispered, disbelief creeping into his voice. "What do you mean, paid to lie?" Sienna's expression was unwavering. "Damien Cole. He paid you to come here, to claim Luna as your daughter, to take her away from Asher. He orchestrated all of this, Ilara. He's behind the lies." For a long, tense moment, Ilara didn't say anything. Her eyes darted nervously, as if she were calculating her next move. But it was too late. The truth had already been spoken. Sienna had connected the dots, and the realization hit Asher like a freight train. Damien, his trusted business partner, the man who had betrayed him, who had schemed to destroy his life. It was all falling into place now. Ilara's lips parted in a soft gasp, but she quickly regained her composure. "You have no proof of that," she said, her voice suddenly small, her bravado faltering. "Damien hasn't said anything to you." "No," Sienna replied, her voice cool and steady. "But I know what I heard. And I know how much he's willing to do to get control of Asher's company. He's using you as a pawn, Ilara. And it's time you realize that." Ilara's face went pale. The truth was sinking in. Asher watched, his heart thudding in his chest. This wasn't just a fight for Luna anymore. This was something much bigger. A battle for the truth, for everything that had been stolen from him. And now it seemed that the final betrayal had been revealed. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, each breath held in suspense, waiting for the final verdict. Asher sat at the table, his back straight, his eyes unwavering. He had fought too hard for this moment to let anything ruin it now. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, but his mind was clear, focused only on the one thing that mattered: Luna. Across from him, Ilara sat with her lawyer, the same cold expression she had worn since she entered the courtroom. She was confident, but Asher could see the cracks in her facade. There was fear now. Fear of losing everything she had tried so hard to take. And then there was Damien, sitting quietly in the back, his eyes darting nervously, trying to maintain a calm exterior. Asher knew this was his final showdown. Sienna stood beside him, her face a perfect mask of calm resolve. She wasn't just a witness today. She was more than that. She was Luna's guardian, and she had as much at stake as Asher did. The DNA results had been delivered weeks ago, and with them, the proof that Luna was Asher's daughter. No one could deny it now. The truth had finally come to light. The judge, an elderly man with glasses perched at the end of his nose, cleared his throat and looked over the papers in front of him. The room grew still as he prepared to deliver his judgment. It was the moment they had all been waiting for, the culmination of months of secrets, lies, and betrayals, the moment that would decide Luna's fate. As we conclude the testimony, the judge began, his voice steady. "I must remind the court that we are here to determine who is the rightful guardian of baby Luna Lockwood. The evidence has been presented, and we will now proceed with the final ruling." Asher's heart pounded in his chest. Every second felt like an eternity. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, but also so determined. This wasn't just about his future. It was about Luna's, and he would do anything to make sure she had the life she deserved. Ilara's lawyer spoke up, trying to make one last stand. "Your Honor, we have presented ample evidence showing that Ilara Lockwood is the biological mother of Luna. The court must recognize her parental rights." The judge nodded, acknowledging the argument. But then he turned his attention to the evidence that had already been provided, the DNA results. "With all due respect," the judge said, his voice firm, "the DNA test results submitted by Mr. Lockwood have been confirmed as authentic. The evidence shows that Mr. Lockwood is indeed the biological father of Luna. This evidence stands in stark contrast to the claim that Ilara Lockwood is the mother." Asher felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tempered with the weight of the moment. It wasn't over yet. Ilara still had her lawyer, still had her final push to regain control, to twist the truth in her favor. But the truth was undeniable, and it was in this very courtroom that it would finally be set free. The judge continued, addressing both parties directly. "The court has thoroughly reviewed the circumstances surrounding the birth and custody of baby Luna. While I understand the emotional stakes for all involved, we must base our decision on the law and the evidence presented. And it is clear that Mr. Lockwood's paternity has been established beyond any reasonable doubt." Ilara's lawyer opened his mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "I am ruling in favor of Mr. Asher Lockwood's petition for custody," the judge announced. "He is the legal father of baby Luna. As such, he will be granted full custody of the child. The request for custody by Mrs. Lockwood is denied." The courtroom erupted into a mix of gasps and murmurs. Asher's heart swelled with both triumph and relief. He had won. Luna was his, and she would remain his. But there was still more to be done. "As for the matter of guardianship," the judge continued, "Dr. Sienna Rhodes, the child's legal aunt and co-guardian, is hereby granted official co-guardianship of baby Luna, effective immediately." Sienna's face softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She looked at Asher, a quiet, shared victory passing between them. Their battle had been long and hard, but they had done it together. Damien, sitting in the back of the courtroom, finally stood up, his face pale, his composure slipping. He had lost his plans, his schemes, his manipulation. It was all for nothing. The truth had crushed him. He had no way out now. But Asher wasn't about to let Damien slink away into the shadows, not without facing the consequences of his actions. As the courtroom quieted again, Asher turned to the judge. "Your Honor," Asher said, his voice steady but filled with resolve, "there is one more matter to address. I would like to make a public statement." The judge nodded, giving him permission to speak. Asher stood up slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. His voice carried, cutting through the silence like a beacon of truth. "For the last several months, my life has been torn apart by lies, by rumors, deceit, and betrayal. The people I trusted most, the people who were supposed to have my back, have been the very ones trying to destroy everything I've worked for. and at the heart of it all was Damien Cole. There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd, but Asher didn't flinch. Damien Cole orchestrated the rumors about my infertility. He paid my ex-wife, Ilara, to leave me and spread lies about my ability to father children. He has spent months manipulating the truth, attempting to take everything from me, including my company. Asher's eyes locked with Damien's across the room. But the truth is stronger than any lie, and the truth is that I am the father of Luna, and I will protect her with everything I have. Damien Cole thought he could play God with my life, but today, justice has been served. The room was dead silent as the weight of Asher's words settled in. The final blow had been struck. Damien's empire of lies had crumbled. There was no more hiding, no more scheming. The whispers were silenced forever. The days following the court ruling were a whirlwind, but they were filled with a sense of peace, of finality. Asher and Sienna officially adopted Luna, their bond sealed not just by the law, but by the love they had both poured into her life. She was theirs, and nothing could ever take her away again. In a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, Asher and Sienna exchanged vows. The promise they made to each other was simple, but profound. To love and protect Luna, to raise her in a world free of the shadows that had once loomed over them. Luna's first steps were an unforgettable moment. She wobbled, unsure, but with the support of both her parents, she found her balance. And when she finally took that first step on her own, Asher couldn't help but break down in tears. It wasn't just the joy of seeing his daughter grow. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed to get to this moment. And in the years that followed, as Luna grew into the confident, joyful child they had always dreamed of, Asher never once stopped looking over his shoulder, never once stopped fighting for the truth. He had lost so much, but in the end, he had gained everything. Asher stood before a crowd at a press conference months later, his gaze steady, his heart full. The whispers have ended, and I will make sure they never start again, he said, his voice clear, echoing the final words that had sealed his victory. This is not just my story, it's Luna's story, it's Sienna's story, and it's a story of truth, love, and redemption. The whispers are gone, and from now on, it's nothing but silence, nothing but peace. And as the cameras flashed, as the crowd applauded, Asher knew that this was just the beginning of the life they would build together. No more lies, no more shadows, just a future they would face, hand in hand, together.